The first thing anyone should understand about interval meter data is that it does not lie the way people lie. It lies the way weather lies by being exactly what it is and letting you draw the wrong conclusion. I was hired in September by a unified school district in the Central Valley to reduce their electrical spend. 22 campuses, roughly 19,000 students, an annual utility outlay north of $4 million. My contract was standard cost recovery work. Pull 3 years of billing, cross-reference against meter assignments, flag anomalies, recover overpayments, and produce a report the board could point at during the next bond cycle. I have done this for 11 districts. It is not interesting work. That is the point of the work. The anomaly I want to describe is not a billing error. I confirmed that within the first week. Every meter on the district's account is assigned to a real structure. Every structure draws power consistent with its use, and the aggregate matches the utility's invoices to within the tolerance the provider guarantees. The books close. I want to be clear about that before I describe anything else, because what I found does not look like anything until first week. Every meter on the district's account is assigned to a real structure. Every structure draws power consistent with its use, and the aggregate matches the utility's invoices to within the tolerance the provider guarantees. The books close. I want to be clear about that before I describe anything else, because what I found does not look like anything until you have first ruled out that it is something. The anomaly is a shape in the data. I noticed it on a Tuesday in early October, working from the district's energy management platform. The software aggregates 15-minute interval reads from every meter facility and displays them as overlaid line graphs. I had pulled a 2-year window across all 22 campuses to look for meters that never dropped below a floor, a classic sign of a stuck load. Usually an HVAC unit failing to cycle down, sometimes a lighting contactor welded shut. I was expecting 3 or 4 hits. That is normal. What I saw instead, when I zoomed out to the full district view, was that at 10:47 a.m. on the Tuesday before, every campus in the district had drawn slightly less power for approximately 11 minutes. Not a lot less. Between 2 and 4%, depending on the site. Well within normal variance for any single meter. If I had been looking at one campus, I would not have noticed. But it was every campus. Elementary, middle, high, the transportation yard, the administrative annex, the aquatic center, the agricultural facility out on Weller Road. 22 independent electrical services on 4 different substations drew down together for 11 minutes and then returned to baseline. I checked the utilities grid data for a voltage sag or a demand response event. Nothing. The provider had not called a curtailment. There was no weather event. The regional load on the transmission side was unremarkable. I flagged it as a data artifact, some kind of polling glitch in the EMS, and moved on. 2 days later, at 1:22 p.m. on a Thursday, it happened again. This time I watched it live. I had left the district-wide overlay open on my second monitor while I worked through the transportation yard's demand charges. The lines dipped together, 22 of them. Then they came back. The dip lasted 9 minutes. When I pulled the raw meter data from the provider's portal, bypassing the district's EMS entirely, the same 9 minutes were present in the utility's own records. 2 independent systems agreeing is the first thing that stops being a data artifact. I spent that evening building a query. I wanted every interval across every meter for the last 36 months. District's EMS entirely. The same 9 minutes were present in the utility's own records. 2 independent systems agreeing is the first thing that stops being a data artifact. I spent that evening building a query. I wanted every interval across every meter for the last 36 months, where the district-wide aggregate load dropped by more than 1.5% for more than 5 continuous minutes with no correlated weather, no correlated grid event, and no correlated bell schedule. The query took 40 minutes to run. It returned 431 events. They were not random. They clustered on school days. They did not occur on weekends, holidays, or during summer recess. They occurred between roughly 9 a.m. and 2:30 p.m., which is to say during instructional hours. They lasted between 6 and 14 minutes. And when I plotted them against the academic calendar, the frequency rose gradually across each semester and fell sharply after final exams. I want to describe what I did next carefully because the sequence matters. I called the utility. I spoke to a senior distribution engineer named Ramon Delgado, whom I have worked with on the 2 prior contracts, and who is one of the more patient people I know. I described what I was seeing. I asked him whether it was possible that some kind of coordinated switching event on the provider's side, a capacitor bank cycling, a regulator adjustment, an automated feeder reconfiguration, could produce a coincident dip across 4 substations. He said it could in principle, but that the provider logs every such action, and there were no logs corresponding to my 431 events. He offered to have his team pull the SCADA history on their side. 2 days later, he called back and said, in a tone I had not heard from him before, that his own data confirmed the dips and that his engineers could not account for them. He asked me to send him my query. I did. He said he would get back to me. He has not, as of this writing, gotten back to me. That was the moment I stopped treating this as a billing project. I want to say something here about the nature of my job. A utility analyst is trained to reconcile numbers against physical reality. When a meter says a building consumed 4,000 kilowatt hours in a month, my job is to verify that 4,000 kilowatt hours of work actually got done. Lights ran, motors turned, computers stayed on, air moved. The direction of verification runs from the number to the world. What I was now looking at was the opposite. 22 meters on 4 substations in the accounting systems of 2 separate institutions were agreeing that something in the physical world was happening. My job was to find out what substations in the accounting systems of 2 separate institutions were agreeing that something in the physical world was happening. My job was to find out what. I went to the schools. I started with Harmon Elementary because it had the cleanest signal, the sharpest dips, the most consistent timing. Harmon is a mid-sized K-5 campus on the east side of the district, built in 1994, roughly 600 students. I met the head custodian, a man named Elias Moreno, on a Wednesday morning at 9:30. I told him I was doing an energy audit and wanted to walk the site during instructional hours to observe load patterns. This is a normal request. He gave me a radio and a visitor badge and told me to stay out of the classrooms unless a teacher waved me in. The dip that day, per my later review of the data, occurred at 10:38 a.m. and lasted 7 minutes. At 10:38 a.m., I was standing in the main electrical room off the cafeteria, watching the building's primary meter through the utilities Field Tech app on my phone. The load dropped. I could see it drop. I looked around the electrical room for anything that might have cycled off a chiller, a pump, a large motor. Nothing had changed. The room hummed exactly as it had a minute earlier. The HVAC was running. The lights were on. The kitchen equipment, which was the largest single load on the site at that hour, was drawing normally. I walked out into the main hallway. The school was quiet. Not silent. I could hear an HVAC diffuser, the compressor on a drinking fountain, the faint sound of a class down the hall. But it was quieter than a school of 600 children should have been at 10:40 on a Wednesday morning. I walked past 3 classrooms with their doors propped open. In each one, the children were at their desks, and they were not moving. I want to be precise. They were not frozen. They were not unconscious. They were sitting, most of them upright, a few with their heads down on folded arms, and they were breathing normally. The teachers were at the front of the room, standing or seated, doing nothing in particular. In the first classroom, the teacher was looking at her computer screen. In the second, he was looking out the window. In the third, she was looking at the children, but not at any one child. Nobody was speaking. Nobody was writing. A pencil rolled off a desk in the second room and hit the floor, and nobody looked at it. This lasted, from my hallway perspective, another 4 minutes. Then a bell rang. Not the class change bell, something softer, an intercom tone I did not recognize, and the classroom started up again. The teacher in the first room said, "Okay, page 42. The children in the second room began sliding paper across their desks. The pencil stayed on the floor until a boy in the front row picked it up. I went back to the electrical room. The meter had returned to baseline. I stood there for a while before I left the building. That afternoon, I went to the district office and pulled the master bell schedule. There is no 1038 tone at Harmon Elementary. There is no soft intercom tone at any campus in the district. I checked the intercom system's programming logs through the vendor's portal. The 1038 tone at Harmon on that Wednesday was not logged. It had not been triggered by the intercom system. I sat with that for about an hour, and then I called Elias Moreno and asked him, as casually as I could manage, whether the school had any kind of scheduled quiet period during the morning. He said no. I asked whether the children ever went still, all at once for a few minutes. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You mean the settle?" I asked him what the settle was. He said it was a thing that happened sometimes. Not every day. A few times a week. The kids got quiet, the teachers got quiet, and then it passed. He said the teachers didn't talk about it much, and the kids didn't seem to remember it afterward. And it had been happening as long as he had worked there, which was 19 years. He said the previous head custodian, who had trained him, had told him not to worry about it. He said he had assumed every school had one. I asked him if he had ever mentioned it to the principal. He said, "You don't mention it, you just let it happen. It goes faster if nobody's in the room." I drove to 2 other campuses that week during predicted dip windows. I used my query to forecast likely times based on the semester's rising frequency. I was right twice out of 3. At Weller Agricultural at 11:14 a.m. on a Friday, I stood outside the classroom trailer and watched through the window as 14 high school juniors sat at their lab benches without moving for 9 minutes, while their teacher stood at the whiteboard with a marker in his hand. At Cortez Middle at 1:47 p.m. on a Monday, I sat in the front office and watched the receptionist stop mid-sentence on a phone call, listen to nothing for 11 minutes, and then resume the sentence as if no time had passed. The person on the other end of the line, when she finished the sentence, apparently did not notice either. The meters in both cases dipped and recovered on schedule. I want to describe the load profile of what I am calling the settle, because it is the part that a utility analyst can say something about with confidence, and it is the part that I have thought about the most. During a settle, the district's aggregate electrical demand drops by an average of 3.1%. The drop is not uniform across load types. Lighting stays constant. HVAC stays constant. Kitchen equipment stays constant. Motor loads, pumps, fans, compressors stay constant. What drops is what the industry calls plug load and small power, the aggregate consumption of everything downstream of a standard receptacle. Computers idling, projectors on standby, interactive whiteboards, phone chargers, the little transformers in every classroom that power the pencil sharpeners and the fish tank pumps and the desk lamps. Plug load in a school does not usually vary at the minute scale. It varies at the hour scale, as devices are switched on and off by human beings. For the district's plug load to drop by 3% for 11 minutes and then return to baseline, something has to be causing thousands of small devices across 22 campuses to draw slightly less current simultaneously. I do not know what that something is. I want to be clear that I do not know, but I know the shape of it. It is not a signal being sent to the devices. It is not a command from the network. I checked. The district's IT infrastructure logs no coordinated events at those times, and many of the affected devices are not networked at all. The pencil sharpener in room 12 at Harmon Elementary is a 1990s model with a brush motor and a mechanical switch. It draws less current during a settle. I verified this with a clamp meter on a Thursday in late October. I do not have an explanation for how. What I have is a correlation. During a settle, the human beings in the buildings become still. And during a settle, the electrical devices in the buildings, including devices that are not being touched, not being interacted with, and not being commanded, also become, in some measurable sense, still. The current they draw when nobody is looking at them is slightly less than the current they draw when somebody is. I have gone back and forth on how to describe this without sounding like I am claiming something I cannot support. Here is the most conservative version I can construct. For reasons I do not understand, the electrical load of a school building is not fully independent of the attention of the people inside it. When the people go still, the building goes still with them, at a level of granularity that shows up on a 15-minute interval meter as a coincident dip across every campus in the district. I want to say one more thing about the children. I went back to Harmon Elementary in the second week of November. I asked Elias if I could sit in the back of a classroom during a predicted window. He looked at me for a while and then he said, "You'd be better off in the hallway. It's easier from the hallway." I asked him what he meant. He said, "You'll see them, you'll want to look at one of them, and you'll want them to look back. They won't. And then you'll be the one in the room who's still moving. And that's not—" He stopped. He said, "Just stay in the hallway, please." I stayed in the hallway. At 10:52 a.m. on that Wednesday, the settle came. I was standing outside Mrs. Aguilar's third grade classroom. Through the open door, I could see 22 children at their desks. 21 of them went still in the way. I had come to recognize the small drop of the shoulders, the softening of the face, the eyes that stayed open but stopped focusing on anything in particular. The 22nd child, a girl in the second row with her hair in two braids, did not go still. She looked at me. She looked at me for the entire 11 minutes. She did not smile. She did not move otherwise. She did not appear frightened or curious. She looked at me the way a person looks at a light that has been left on. When the soft tone sounded and the other children resumed pencils moving, a cough, Mrs. Aguilar saying, "Okay, take out your reading." The girl in the braids turned back to her desk and took out her reading with the others and did not look at me again. I asked Elias on my way out whether some kids didn't settle. He said, "A few, not many. It's usually the same ones. They grow out of it, mostly. By fifth grade, almost all of them settle." I asked him what happened to the ones who didn't. He said they graduate. I have written a report for the district. It is 9 pages long, and it does not mention the settle. It documents the 431 events, describes the coincident load pattern, notes that the utility provider has independently confirmed the drops, and recommends further investigation into what the report calls unexplained coordinated demand variance. I have submitted it to the Assistant Superintendent for Business Services, a woman named Karen Whitfield, who received it politely and told me she would route it appropriately. I do not expect to hear back about it. I have done this work long enough to know what routed appropriately means. My contract ends in 3 weeks. I will be paid. The district will not implement my recommendations because my recommendations are not actionable in any framework the district possesses. There is no line item for investigating why the children get quiet. There is no vendor to procure it from. There is no capital project that addresses it. The settle is not a problem the institution can see because the institution's instruments are calibrated to see problems, and the settle is not producing one. The lights stay on. The kids test at grade level. The meters read slightly lower than they otherwise would. The district saves, by my calculation, about $11,000 a year in electricity that the settle declines to consume. I have thought about that number a lot. $11,000 is not nothing in a district budget. It is not enough to notice, but it is enough to depend on in the way that institutions depend on small, consistent margins without ever naming them. If the settle stopped tomorrow, the district's electrical spend would rise by about 0.25%, and someone in my role, 3 years from now, would be hired to find out why. I do not know what the settle is. I have been careful in this account not to speculate, because speculation is not what I was hired for, and it is not what I am good at. I am good at reconciling numbers against physical reality. What I can tell you is that the numbers and the physical reality in this district are reconciled. The meters are accurate. The children are real. The stillness is real. The small coincident drop in the current drawn by thousands of unrelated devices during the minutes when the children are still is real. And it has been real for at least the 3 years my data covers. And I suspect, based on one conversation with a retired facilities director who agreed to speak with me only on the condition that I not name him considerably longer than that. I asked him at the end of that conversation whether he thought it was doing any harm. He said, "The kids are fine. They've always been fine. That's the part that gets you after a while. They're fine." I asked him what he meant by that. He said, "You keep waiting for it to do something. It doesn't do anything. It just happens. And then it's over, and everyone goes back to what they were doing. After about 10 years, you realize you're the only one still waiting." I drove home from that conversation on a Thursday evening in late November. I stopped at a light on Weller Road near the agricultural campus, and I sat there for a moment after the light turned green because I was thinking. A car behind me honked. I looked up. The light was green. I drove. I have thought since then about the honk. I have thought about how, if I had not been honked at, I might have sat at that green light for another minute, or another 5, and about whether I would have known I was sitting there, and about whether the street light, which draws its power from the same utility, on the same grid, as the schools, would have dimmed very slightly while I sat. I have not gone back to check the data. My contract ends in 3 weeks. After that, I will not have access to the district's energy management platform, and the utilities public portal does not provide the resolution I would need. I could ask Ramon Delgado at the provider to pull the streetlight circuit for me as a favor. I have not asked him. I do not think I am going to ask him. I want to end this report the way I end all my reports, which is with a recommendation. My recommendation is that the district continue to pay its electrical bills as invoiced, that the coordinated demand variance be logged as an ongoing observation of unknown origin, and that no further investigation be initiated at this time. I want to say for the record that this is not the recommendation I would have made in September. In September, I would have recommended a full engineering study, a forensic review of the EMS, and a coordinated inquiry with the utility. I have changed my recommendation because in the course of this audit, I have come to believe that the settle is not a malfunction of the district's electrical infrastructure. It is a feature of the district's operation in the same way that the bell schedule is a feature, and the lunch program is a feature, and the fact that 600 children can be persuaded to sit in a room together for 6 hours a day is a feature. It is one of the things that makes the school work. I do not know how. I do not know why. I know that it has been working quietly for a long time, and that the people who have worked longest inside it have learned not to interrupt it. I am submitting this account privately, outside my contracted deliverables, because I think somebody should have written it down. I do not intend to publish it. I do not intend to discuss it. If you are reading this, you have found it in a file I have not decided yet whether to keep. The girl in the braids is in 3rd grade. Next year, she will be in 4th. The year after that, 5th. Elias says almost all of them settle by 5th grade. I think about her sometimes, in the evenings, when the house is quiet and I am sitting at my desk, and I notice that I have been sitting there for longer than I meant to. I check the clock. I get up. I move around. I turn on a light I do not need, and I watch it for a moment to make sure it is drawing what it should,